What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. The Commanders have finally done it. It's been a very, very wild week for the Washington Commanders, including playing the Cowboys on Thanksgiving, which that did not go well. We'll get into more of that later. But I think the most notable thing to talk about is, of course, the firing of Jack Del Rio, the defensive coordinator, former Raiders head coach, the 4-year defensive coordinator for the Washington Commanders, was fired on Friday, on Black Friday, the day after the absolute disaster of a game against the Dallas Cowboys the day prior on Thanksgiving. Jack Del Rio, he coached up this, just some stats so far for this season. The 29th worst defense in terms of yards per game in the NFL. This Commanders defense has let up the most passing yards out of any other defense in the NFL this season. And they're also in the bottom half for rushing yards allowed per game as well. So it was just a complete disaster from Ron Rivera and Jack Del Rio's part of coaching up this defense, a defense that when they inherited it, they had 3 first-round picks. They added Chase Young as well in their very first draft with that second overall pick. And this defense has been top 5 once in this span, maybe twice. It was kind of top 10 in 2020, or it was top 5 in 2020, and then top 10 last year. So this defense now has been in the bottom 10 twice, top 5 once, and top 10 once. But with the amount of talent on this team, on this defense, at the point where you had to trade away Chase Young and Montez Sweat because the team was that bad and the defense was performing that bad that you had to trade away two of your your 2 best pass rushers on the team and 2 of your best players on that defense as well. So, I mean, it was just a complete disaster from Jack Del Rio. It needed to happen. Washington, they elected to choose firing Jack Del Rio over Ron Rivera. I think with this, it kind of means that Ron Rivera will be the head coach to the end of the season. I'll talk about what's next for him in a little bit, but more on Jack Del Rio. I don't know what's next for him. I really don't. I guess position maybe at a lower, or maybe coaching at a lower position on a team. But yeah, Jack Del Rio's performance with the amount of talent that he was given on that defense, he was saved by some of the later draft picks. Guys like Derek Forrest that was selected. Cam Curl came in even. Both of them have played absolutely out of their minds within the last 3 years. So not only did they have that top-end first-round talent on this defense with Payne, Allen, Montez Sweat, Chase Young, and they even drafted Jamin Davis, who they thought was going to be their middle linebacker of the future, and he's clearly not. So not only do you have those guys, you have a mixture of veterans like Kendall Fuller. You've brought in a lot of linebackers over the years, guys like Cody Barton this year, who has been an absolute disaster in coverage, and a guy like Cole Holcomb, who's been the middle linebacker for a while as well in Washington, except up until this year. So you had a mixture of first-round end talent. You have later draft picks coming in and playing higher than what playing better than what they were projected to play. And even then, with all this capital that you spent on this defense, it has turned into a complete disaster. And Jack Del Rio didn't even last 4 years. So Washington goes ahead and gets rid of Jack Del Rio, which, again, great move for Washington, great move for Josh Harrison Company. Love to see it. Again, it means that Ron Rivera is going to be the coach to the end of the season. I think that was kind of just guaranteed with him going into this year for Josh Harris, kind of evaluating Ron Rivera throughout the entire season. So we'll see what's next for Rivera. But yeah, Jack Del Rio, an absolute disaster of the last 3.5 years for most of it in with this Commanders defense. But he wasn't the only person to get fired, because secondary coach Brent Veselmeyer also got fired as well. But Veselmeyer, I know there's some people on Twitter looking at it. Before, I don't know how no one realizes, but before he was the secondary coach here in Washington on an NFL team, he was a high school coach last year. He wasn't even in college or on a lower position on a different team or getting promoted from Washington. He was a high school coach last year. And now he's getting put up and having to coach a NFL secondary. That's not going to work out, and it did not work out. Like I mentioned earlier, Washington allowing the most passing yards out of any defense in the NFL. So it's embarrassing seeing just this news being found out now that Wieselmeyer was a high school coach before this, and the secondary has been lit up in flames the last 3 years, or even more than that. Chris Harris Jr. has been, or Chris Harris has been one of the best secondary coaches in the NFL. Chris Harris with Washington, he developed guys like Kendall Fuller. He developed Cam Curl, Derek Forrest in that secondary. And we were even, maybe if he stayed, then he was going to be able to develop a guy like Emmanuel Forbes. But again, that didn't happen. Another guy he developed was Benjamin St. Juste into a very good player last season. So down the stretch last season. So again, Chris Harris was a great coach for Washington in that secondary. And now Chris Harris, of course, leaving after last season, going over to Tennessee for a very similar position, kind of similar to how Eric Bieniemy went from Kansas City to Washington with like a little bit of a better title. That's exactly what happened for Chris Harris. And so Chris Harris in Tennessee has done, it's done all right. Tennessee isn't the greatest team, but you love to have a guy like Chris Harris on that coaching staff, because this secondary has been atrocious without his presence in that coaching staff and in the locker room. So Chris Harris, a big time loss, and now Brent Wieselmeyer, he didn't even last 1 year as the secondary coach for Washington. So yeah, we'll see what happens with how the secondary improves down the stretch. But Christian Garcia, the replacement now for Brent Wieselmeyer, he's now the new secondary coach. He came in as he was the assistant defensive backs coach for Washington. He came in 2021 as the defensive coaching assistant. 1 year later, he was named defensive quality control assistant and then promoted again earlier this year after Chris Harris left to the assistant defensive back / Nichols role. So as the new secondary coach, we'll see what they can do. But again, the secondary is not going to win teams. It's not going to win us games. Emmanuel Forbes has been one of the major disappointments on this team. He's played better in coverage recently, but also he came in as a ball hawk, right? Someone who's going to take. He was projected to be a guy like what DeRon Bland is doing right now. A guy that has a nose for the football. He's going to take pick sixes to the house or interceptions to the house, and he's not done that. Only one interception on the season. Almost dropped that interception. First of all, only one interception on the season, and it's been a major, major disappointment. So we'll see what happens with the defense and the secondary. But who's now going to be calling defensive plays with Jack Del Rio gone? Is going to be none other than the man himself, Ron Rivera. So Ron Rivera will be the defensive play caller, calling plays for the first time since 2019. Something that he's never done in Washington. He's going to put it on himself. We'll see what happens next week. His very first task up against Tyreek Hill, Tua Tagovailoa, Mike McDaniel in that Dolphins offense. So we'll see what happens, how they prepare for that. But Ron Rivera is now the new defensive play caller. We'll see what happens with that. I'm not. My hopes are not high. All right, it's tank season for Washington. I'll get into more of that later, but it's my hopes are not high. Losing Jack Del Rio, great stuff. Great, but it's only great thing. But it's only one little part. You know who's next, and that's Ron Rivera, Josh Harris and company. Because all the reports are saying they're going to keep Ron Rivera to the end of the season. Makes sense. Don't want to change anything. I don't even know if there's a coach on the staff that's going to be a good interim head coach right now. We look at a guy like Eric Bieniemy, right, assistant head coach right now. He'd probably be the interim head coach for the rest of the season if Ron Rivera were to get fired, and I don't trust him. Eric Bieniemy, he needs to focus on his play calling. Get his play calling better, because right now, in recent weeks, his play calling has been very inconsistent. So we'll see what happens about that. Ron Rivera, which I expect him to be gone after the Week 18 matchup against Dallas the day after. So, that'll do it for Ron Rivera. In terms of the matchup itself against the Dallas Cowboys on Thanksgiving, I'm not going to talk about it too much because it was disaster from start to finish. The Dallas Cowboys beating the Washington Commanders 45-10. 45-10. On a Thanksgiving showdown. I'm not exaggerating the score or anything. It was 45-10. Sam Howell, 28-44, 300 yards, a pick, sacked 4 times. The offense wasn't moving the ball. Curtis Samuel actually hit 100 yards. Now that I'm looking at it, I don't remember the last game when a wide receiver for Washington hit 100 yards. I'll pull it up real quick, but I don't I don't think there's been a like last time a receiver hitting 100 yards. Brian Robinson in week 10, and then Jahan Dotson in week 8 are the only two other times someone that's hit 100 receiving yards for the Commanders this season. It just shows how this offense is so dysfunctional. The defense is dysfunctional. Dak Prescott going 22 of 32, 331 yards, 4 touchdowns. We did not even touch Dak Prescott in this game. 0 sacks for him. So, yeah, that was pretty much the Commanders-Cowboys game. It was a disaster from start to finish. I had to watch it in front of all my relatives who are all Cowboys fans. So it was not fun. But, yeah, the Thanksgiving Day disaster, it wasn't the worst. The thing is, like, it wasn't even the worst loss to the Cowboys in the Ron Rivera era. Losing 45-10, it wasn't even the worst because that game 2 years ago, I believe, I think it was 2 years ago, the 56-14 game against the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football on primetime. Yeah. But yeah, the Thanksgiving game, third most watched regular season game of all time. Over 40 million people tuned in, and Washington blew it 45-10. So that kind of caused all the dominoes starting to fall here in Washington. Jack Del Rio getting fired, Ron Rivera getting fired. Ron Rivera is next. It's going to happen after Week 18, that Monday, Black Monday. All of the coaches worry about after that Week 18 game. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, it was not good. It was not good. But as for what's next for Washington, we've got the Dolphins next week. Elite Takes will be hopping on the pod for that after the game. So we'll hear his thoughts because I know I haven't had a guest in a while. So Elite Takes will be hopping on the pod. And then that's the Dolphins game. Week after that's the bye week. I'm actually going to go through some of the quarterbacks, I think, or kind of just touch on the college landscape in terms of the NFL prospect landscape, because the Washington Commanders, as I'm recording this, 5:06 p.m. on Sunday, the Washington Commanders have a top 5 draft pick in the NFL draft and could have a top 4 draft pick depending on Monday night's game, which would be tonight's game when this episode comes out, against the Bears and the Vikings. If the Bears win that, then Washington will have a top 4 pick in the draft after 12 weeks. So Washington currently sitting at 5th. They were 7th coming into Sunday, and then the Giants winning with the Patriots missed 35-yarder by Chad Ryland as time expired. So the Giants won, and then the Titans beat the Panthers. So Washington with the top 5 pick right now, looking pretty good in terms of draft picks. We got the Dolphins after next week, then the bye week, and then Los Angeles, New York, the Jets, which there was a report today that Aaron Rodgers could be back in time, or he's aiming to be back for that game against Washington on December 24th. If the Jets were to be eliminated by week 16 when we play them, I would not expect Aaron Rodgers to play. But if the Jets are still in contention for the playoffs, I would expect Aaron Rodgers to play in that game against Washington on December 24th. So again, 5 games left in 6 weeks. We got Miami, we got the week 14 bye, and then the Rams, the Jets, the 49ers, and the Cowboys. I'm looking at the schedule right now, and an 0-5 seems very, very possible for Washington. If we go 0-5 and finish the year 4-13, I believe, 4-13, I want to say, then we would definitely have a top 3 draft pick, in my opinion, or maybe top 4 draft pick in the NFL. So definitely rooting for a bunch of teams to win, a bunch of bad teams to win games, and rooting for us to lose games for the rest of the season, sitting at 4-5 right now. But yeah, that'll be it for this week's episode. Kind of a quick one, only 15 minutes, but that'll be it for this week's episode. We're going to have a longer one next week, of course, with Elite Takes, going over the Dolphins-Commanders game. I can't wait for that. And then the bye week, I'll probably touch on some prospects that I've liked so far through scouting and all that. I don't really promote it that much. I should probably promote it more. But if you want to see my scouting reports on TWSN, I'll have a link in the description, or you can check out my link tree. It's like Mason_Kinahan. So that'll be it for this week's episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. See you guys next one. Peace.